They laughed, my own parents. Mom covered her mouth like she was hiding some private joke, while Dad shook his head in false pity. $10, he muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. I sat frozen in that room full of smirks, my face burning, hands trembling. The lawyer had just spoken my name, and that was it. To Dana Harper, $10. No reason, no explanation. Just $10. The silence that followed wasn't shocking to me. Only the cruel snickers of relatives who had always made me feel like I didn't belong. But then Mr. Whitaker, the attorney, cleared his throat. Actually, he said, adjusting his glasses, there's also a private letter addressed solely to Dana. The room went utterly silent. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my parents' eyes. They didn't know what was coming. Neither did I. I was born into a family where success was mapped out before you could even walk. The Harpers weren't just rich, we were legacy. My grandfather had built a manufacturing empire from nothing, and my parents inherited it like royalty. Even Christmas wrapping paper came with rules. From the beginning, I didn't fit. My older brother Lucas carried himself like a CEO by middle school. I was the kid tucked away at family gatherings with a sketchbook. My mom called my paintings cute distractions. My dad didn't acknowledge them at all. At 13, I saved for months to buy a secondhand camera. I spent weekends photographing rusted fences, kids on skateboards, anything real, anything unpolished. When I proudly showed my mom a black and white print, she blinked and said, "You look tired. Maybe spend less time outside." By high school, the divide was final. Lucas was the heir. I was merely tolerated. I remember overhearing them once after a board meeting. "She needs a reality check," my father said. "Dreams don't secure a legacy." "She's young," my mother replied weakly. "She'll fall in line eventually." I didn't. I secretly applied to art school. When the acceptance letter arrived, I announced it over dinner. "You want to study photographs?" my father said, as if the word itself was beneath him. "That's not a career, Dana. That's a hobby." And my mother added the sentence that scarred me more than I'd admit. "You're throwing away your inheritance." 2 months later, I left. I scraped by on scholarships, side jobs, and shooting photos for local bands. I edited on a busted laptop with missing pixels. I pulled night shifts as a barista. I wasn't chasing fame. I just wanted something that was mine. The only person who never dismissed me was my grandfather, Walter Harper. He didn't talk much, but whenever we saw each other, he always asked, "Still taking pictures?" Then he'd smile. A small one, but real. Maybe he saw something in me. When he passed, I expected nothing grand. He never openly favored me. He was private, old-fashioned. But I hoped for at least a gesture, maybe a photo, a book, a note, something to say I hadn't been invisible. So when the lawyer read, "To Dana Harper, $10, and the room erupted with laughter, I felt my chest cave in. But maybe it wasn't rejection. Maybe it was a key. The last time I saw him alive was 3 weeks before his death. It wasn't planned. I had just finished a photo shoot downtown, and somehow ended up at his brownstone. I hadn't visited in over a year. My family wasn't the type for casual drop-ins, but something pulled me there. Intuition, maybe desperation. I rang the bell, expecting no answer. To my surprise, he opened the door himself. Thinner, slower, but his eyes still sharp. "Well," he said with a faint smirk, "a Harper who actually knocks." He invited me in without a word about why I'd come. The house smelled of cedar and old books. Everything was in perfect order, like time itself paused at the door. We sat in his study surrounded by leather chairs and oil portraits of ancestors I'd never known. He didn't ask about the family. Instead, he asked about my photography. "What are you working on now?" he said, pouring tea from a silver pot. I hesitated. "A series called Invisible Homes. I'm photographing abandoned buildings, mostly in neighborhoods being demolished." He studied me for a long moment. "And what are you trying to say with them?" "That people matter," I answered, "even if the world forgets them." He gave the faintest nod. "That's dangerous work." "Why?" I asked. "Because you're telling the truth. And truth costs more than people realize." We sat quietly after that. No small talk. No glances at a watch. For once, I felt truly seen. When I rose to leave, he followed me to the door, opened a drawer in the foyer, and pulled out a battered old film camera. Older than me, its corners chipped, its leather strap worn. "This was mine," he said, placing it in my hands. "Before I built the company. I carried this everywhere." I was stunned. "I didn't know you were into photography." He didn't answer at first, just gazed past me out the window. "I stopped," he finally said. "Some dreams can't survive the weight of inheritance." Then he looked straight at me, really looked. "Don't let them take your eye, Dana. That's your gift. And your rebellion." Those were the last words he ever spoke to me. I left standing in the cold, camera in hand, unsure of what he truly meant. At the time, I thought he was warning me about business. I didn't realize until later he was warning me about the family. The will reading took place in a midtown office of glass walls and marble floors, the kind of place where wealth whispers instead of speaks. I wore my best black dress, the one for funerals and gallery shows. I straightened my hair just to avoid Mom's usual digs about looking unkempt. The moment I stepped into the conference room, tension wrapped around me like a cloak. My parents were already at the head of the table, poised as if presiding over a board meeting. Lucas gave me a stiff nod, empty. My mother didn't even glance at me. My father lifted an eyebrow, as if surprised I was even included. Relatives I hadn't seen in years poured in. Cousins, aunts, in-laws, each one with that hungry glint in their eyes. The air smelled of cologne, leather, and quiet competition. At exactly 10 a.m., Mr. Whitaker entered, carrying a thick file. His face was as calm and unreadable as stone. "Thank you all for coming," he said, settling into his seat. "We've gathered today for the reading of Walter H. Harper's final will." It began predictably. Aunt Lydia was left a vacation house in Vermont. Various cousins received stocks. Lucas, unsurprisingly, inherited the antique gun collection. My mother was given a necklace passed down from my grandmother. My father was handed a portfolio of real estate assets, along with a handwritten letter I couldn't see from my seat. I sat quietly, my hands clasped tightly beneath the table to steady their shaking. Then Mr. Whitaker's eyes shifted toward me. "To Dana Harper," he announced after a pause, "Walter leaves the amount of $10. The words landed like a weight in the room before the silence shattered. My father exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "That's what rebellion earns you," he muttered. My mother actually laughed. A cousin leaned close and whispered, "Must have been one scandalous picture." Heat crept up my neck. I forced back the tears. I wouldn't break down here, not in front of them. I swallowed hard, gave a small nod, and said softly, "Understood." It wasn't the money that cut me. It was the message behind it. I had always felt different, the odd one out in my own family. But hearing my name read off like an afterthought, and hearing my parents laugh, as if I were nothing more than a punchline, that pierced deeper than anything. I wanted to stand up and walk out. I nearly did. But then Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat. "There is one more matter," he said. Instantly, the room went silent again. His gaze landed on me, then dropped back to his folder. "There is a private addendum," he continued deliberately. "It is meant for Dana alone." The words hit the table like a stone dropped into still water. My father scowled. "What do you mean, private?" My mother shifted in her chair, still smug from the earlier announcement. "She's already had her share," she remarked flatly. Mr. Whitaker remained composed. "Mr. Harper left me a sealed envelope with instructions. It is to be read in private. Dana, would you follow me into the adjoining office?" The room stirred instantly with murmurs, suspicion, and sidelong glances. My parents didn't bother hiding their irritation. Lucas looked utterly baffled, like he had missed a critical memo. I rose slowly, my chest pounding, avoiding every set of eyes on me. As I walked behind Mr. Whitaker down the short hallway, I could feel their stares burning into my back. The smaller office was cooler, quieter. My heartbeat roared in my ears. Whitaker closed the door gently. On the desk sat a thick cream-colored envelope, my name written across the front in elegant cursive. I recognized the handwriting instantly. "From your grandfather," Whitaker said softly. I lifted it with both hands. It felt heavier than it appeared. I glanced at him. "Did you read it?" He shook his head. "I was told not to. But you have as much time as you need." Without another word, he left the room. I sat down slowly, running my fingers along the wax seal, embossed with a tiny symbol, a small camera. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and broke it open. Inside were several handwritten pages. The very first line made me gasp. My dearest Dana. The opening paragraph was brief. He apologized for what had happened in the main room. He admitted he knew it had stung, and said it was meant to. I needed them to reveal who they truly are when they believed you were powerless, he wrote. As I kept reading, the world beyond the page disappeared. Line after line, my grandfather unveiled a carefully laid plan, months in the making. The $10 inheritance had been nothing more than a decoy. The real legacy had been arranged outside the public reading. I was named the sole heir of the Harper Foundation. Not the board, not Lucas, not my parents, me. Along with it came ownership of a private art gallery, a penthouse studio, and a 70% controlling interest in Harper Creative Trust, a company worth far more than every asset listed at that table combined. And then I reached the words that would change everything. They laughed, Dana, but they laughed too soon. I read the letter 3 times before I believed it. My grandfather had orchestrated a transfer of power so deliberate, so masterful, it left me breathless. According to the papers that came with the letter, I now held the controlling stake in the Harper Creative Trust, the family's hidden financial and charitable powerhouse that had quietly been building wealth behind the scenes. While the rest of my relatives squabbled over beach houses and heirloom clocks, I had been handed the keys to the real foundation of the empire. It wasn't just money. It was vision, legacy, and the freedom to choose. Grandpa's letter spelled it out with perfect clarity. This inheritance wasn't a set of shackles. I wasn't expected to sit in boardrooms, chase titles, or sell myself for the sake of keeping a name alive. What he asked of me was simple, to hold on to the one quality he believed set me apart from the others, my perspective. You see the world, Dana, he wrote. That's rarer than any fortune I've ever owned. The trust is yours to guide, but only if you promise never to become like them. I let out a shaky laugh through my tears. Hidden away in a locked drawer at the gallery he had secretly purchased, he'd kept a collection of my photographs. Every shot I thought had been anonymously bought, every early print I'd sold for pennies. He had acquired them under false names, carefully cataloged and preserved as though they were priceless. He had been there the whole time, not controlling, not criticizing, just watching. It became clear then, he never wanted to leave his life's work to someone who knew only how to follow rules. He wanted someone who could reinvent them. I set the letter aside and took in the quiet of his office. The shelves were filled with books I had never noticed, titles on business, philosophy, photography, ethics. It wasn't the office of a businessman. It was a sanctuary for someone like me. Inside the envelope was also a small black box. I opened it slowly to find a brass key strung on a thin leather cord. Beneath it lay a note in his handwriting. Beacon Street, top floor. Your new studio. Your true inheritance. I stared at the key, overwhelmed. I had walked in expecting nothing, maybe a watch, a photograph, a kind word if I was lucky. Instead, I was handed an entire future. And the most unbelievable part? No one else in that building knew. In the conference room just down the hall, my parents were still laughing, still sneering, still convinced I had gotten exactly what I deserved. They had no idea. And for now, I wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. Let them laugh. I returned to the room, slipping the folded letter into my purse, my expression unreadable. She'll probably frame that $10 check, my father snorted to a chorus of laughter. Might be the most valuable thing she'll ever own. Lucas glanced up and caught my eye first. Everything okay? He asked, not with concern, just idle curiosity. I nodded. Just needed a moment. I replied evenly before sitting back down at the far end of the table. And then I watched. Really watched. My mother fiddling with the chain of her newly inherited necklace. My father reclining with the smugness of a man who thought he had won. Lucas, already bored, scrolling under the table. Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. You need to see them as they are when they think you have nothing. He was right. This was the test, and now it was up to me to decide how to face it. Over the next few days, I stayed silent. I ignored my parents' passive-aggressive texts. I didn't answer when Lucas sent me a screenshot of an article on generational wealth with a winking emoji. Instead, I met with Mr. Whitaker and began the quiet transfer of control over the Harper Creative Trust. I visited the Beacon Street penthouse, and it was real, flooded with sunlight, open and minimalistic. A studio, a gallery, a home, mine. I spent hours wandering through the archive Grandpa had preserved. My photographs carefully framed in matte black, each labeled by hand with date and location. Some I barely remembered creating, but he had remembered them all. He had named the space Harper Light Studio. Walking through it felt like stepping into a parallel life where he had chosen art over empire. And now somehow I was bridging both worlds. But I couldn't shake the question, what now? What would I do with this gift? What would they do once the truth came out? A part of me longed for revenge, for the moment I could lay the truth on their perfect dinner table and watch their smug faces crumble. But another part, the wiser part, I think, wanted something greater. Not just to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. To create something undeniable from the gift I'd been given, something that could never be dismissed or forgotten. That was the way I would triumph, quietly, completely, and with imagination. 6 weeks later, the invitations went out. Refined, simple, and impossible to overlook. Harper Light Studio presents The Inheritance of Vision, a debut gallery exhibition honoring unseen perspectives. This wasn't just an art show. It was a declaration. Attendance was by invitation only, selected critics, art journalists, benefactors, and, of course, my family. I sent theirs through certified mail. Then I waited. Lucas replied at once, eager no doubt for the publicity. My mother texted a vague, "We'll see." My father stayed silent, though Lucas mentioned they intended to show up. Curiosity, pride, or maybe just the urge to keep me under watch. Perfect. Opening night. The studio glowed. Photographs stretched from floor to ceiling, every single one mine. The earliest were unpolished, teenage attempts raw and restless. Then the work shifted, unfolding into a story. Abandoned storefronts, shadows etched along alley walls, portraits of the forgotten. It was my voice, carved in light and silence. But the last room, that was the moment I had been building toward. In the center stood a plinth. On it, a framed check, crisp bills displayed beneath glass, lit like a priceless work of art. Beside it, a plaque read, "Gifted to Dana Harper at the will reading of Walter H. Harper. Value priceless." Beneath that, the second line, "Sometimes the smallest inheritance is the greatest test." Their timing was flawless. They entered just as a local critic addressed the crowd, speaking of the collection as an artistic legacy of quiet defiance. Cameras clicked. Guests nodded. I felt my family's bewilderment before they uttered a sound. Lucas approached first, eyeing the wall of black and white portraits. "All this is yours?" he asked. "Yes." His brow furrowed. "Since when do you run this place?" I smiled. "Since always." My mother stepped closer, pearls at her throat, wearing that tight, insincere expression she used at charity galas. "Dana," she said, her tone strained but meant to sound gracious, "this is ambitious. Did someone fund this?" I kept my voice steady. "No sponsors, just one person who believed." My father joined her, eyes narrowed as he scanned the gallery. "Where did you get the money for all of this?" I tilted my head. "That's not really the question you want to ask, is it?" He said nothing. Then Mr. Whitaker appeared at my side, champagne flute in hand, wearing a rare smile. "Shall we?" he asked. I nodded, and together we stepped onto the small platform near the glass-encased check. The room hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitaker began, "thank you for joining us this evening at Harper Light Studio. Created by and devoted to the vision of Dana Harper." A ripple of murmurs spread. Cameras flashed. "It's also time we share a part of the story few here know," he continued. "As executor of Walter Harper's private estate, it's my honor to announce that Dana Harper is not only the founder of this studio, but also the sole heir of the Harper Creative Trust." Gasps broke through the silence. I watched the color drain from my mother's face. Lucas blinked as though he'd misheard. My father started to step forward, but stopped himself. Whitaker's voice carried on. Mr. Harper believed that inheritance should be earned through merit, not granted by bloodline. Dana's relentless dedication to artistic truth. Despite rejection and resistance, won not just his respect, but his complete backing. He lifted his glass to Dana Harper, the true heir. The room erupted with thunderous applause. But I didn't turn toward the crowd. My eyes fixed on them. My mother's lips pressed tight in disbelief. My father's fists clenched stiffly at his sides. Lucas looked stunned, torn between outrage and admiration. I stepped down from the platform and walked straight to them. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother hissed. "Because you never asked," I answered calmly. "You never asked what I was creating, only why I wouldn't follow your path." "We're still your family," she said sharply. "And yet you laughed when I was humiliated," I replied. "That $10, you thought it measured my worth. And this," my father waved at the gallery around us. "This was all a scheme, a setup." "No," I said evenly. "It was a mirror. You just didn't like the reflection." They stayed silent, because what could they possibly say? I left them standing there and returned to the crowd. People who were curious, supportive, maybe even proud. People who didn't see me as a failure, but as a creator. And in that moment, surrounded by my work, my grandfather's trust, and truth laid bare, I finally understood. I had inherited something far beyond wealth. I had inherited the power to define myself. That night, I didn't go back home. I stayed in the penthouse my grandfather left me. When the gallery emptied and the noise faded, I stood barefoot on the hardwood floor of the top-level studio, surrounded by my own photographs. Outside, the city glowed softly, but inside, it felt sacred. On the desk sat the $10 check, no longer hidden in shame. I had reframed it after the show, placing it beside a photo I'd once taken of my grandfather gazing out a train window, quietly watching the world pass him by. It wasn't just inheritance. It was a reminder. He hadn't left me money to rescue me. He left it to free me. In the weeks that followed, I completed plans to grow the Harper Light Studio into a residency program for young artists from underrepresented communities. I converted one floor into living work studios, fully stocked with tools, materials, and mentorship. The first group of artists arrived shy, just as I once had been, but with the same fire in their eyes. Under my leadership, the Harper Creative Trust began offering grants for emerging photographers and visual storytellers, especially those pushed to the edges. At my first board meeting, I showed up in black jeans, boots, and no apology. The other trustees were startled, until I laid out a sharp 3-year plan balancing profit with philanthropy. Grandpa had ensured I'd have the right advisors, and I had learned quickly. Lucas never returned to another show. My parents stopped calling, and that was fine, not out of resentment but clarity. Some ties are roots, others are chains. Months later, one of the young residents knocked on my office door. She clutched a weathered camera, her eyes both bright and uncertain. "Do you ever worry," she asked softly, "that people will see only your money and not your art?" I gave her a gentle smile. "All the time. But it only matters if you let yourself believe it. If you lead with your vision, the rest will follow." She nodded slowly, as though storing the words away for a day of doubt. I realized I was storing them, too. On the first anniversary of my grandfather's passing, Mr. Whitaker delivered one last letter. Just a few lines. "Wealth is not what you keep, but what you choose to create. You were always the legacy I believed in, Dana. You just needed to believe it yourself." That night, I lit a candle in the gallery and left the doors open. Strangers wandered in, students, tourists, wanderers. They paused at the framed $10 check, whispering, wondering. They didn't know the full story. They didn't need to, because my legacy didn't require explanation. It only needed to be lived.